This haunting image of a tree with numerous corpses lynched upon its branches acts as the beginning of our story. A baby was born from one of these corpses and managed to survive. In the first seconds of life, this baby, Guts, is surrounded by death and disease. Yet he is alive. Although it seems impossible and absurd, Guts has already taken his first step in the existential narrative of Berserk. A mercenary band arrives and Guts is adopted and raised by Gambino and a crazy woman named Shizu. She had previously lost her child due to miscarriage, and the mercenary band gossip that she has never been the same ever since. Whilst her husband is unfazed, more preoccupied with his own battles. Even when Shizu has the plague and is dying, Gambino is away fighting, leaving only Guts to be there for her. On his nose after getting angry from sparring. Guts is easy to forgive Gambino as he buys Guts some healing ointment. Then one night, a man named Donovan comes into Guts' tent and has his way with him. Donovan tells Guts that Gambino was the one who sold Guts for a night. Guts, unbelieving, kills Donovan the next day and once again believes Gambino when he feigns ignorance. That is Gambino's band and they chase after him. Guts rides a horse away from them but is shot down and falls from a cliff, where he is assumed dead. Lying, throwing himself into battles whilst relying only on himself and his sword. After having taken down a particularly large enemy, Guts is easily defeated by Griffith, who enlists him to the Band of the Hawk. Throughout the Golden Age arc, we get these beautiful monsters again, reluctant to touch, reluctant to belong to something. Guts does manage to open up to these people and find some meaning for himself, but he would later question even this purpose. After overhearing Griffith talk about his dreams, Guts feels that he can't belong to another man's ambition, seeing himself as underneath that man's dream. Guts is used to living for himself and by his sword. Ironically, this is exactly what Griffith would call a friend in the very same speech. Whilst fighting in the Band of the Hawk, Guts meets a woman named Casca, who idolizes Griffith. Years prior, she had been saved by Griffith from being raped by a man of nobility looking to abuse his powers. Originally a small village girl, Casca was ready for the worst, yet Griffith became her savior. Similar to Guts' origin story, her first big moment begins with her picking up the sword. Going back to Guts, in that month's approached, with the both of them putting up with one another for the sake of Griffith and the good of the Band of the Hawk. The two would later bond when Casca realizes her jealousy at Guts for stealing Griffith's attention. She tells him her background and admits that what she felt for Griffith could never be reciprocated due to his ambition of ruling a kingdom, and that he would eventually aim to seek relations with the princess no matter what. After this realization, Casca begins to develop feelings for Guts. When Guts leaves the Band of the Hawk by bringing his sword down on Griffith's, he breaks Griffith's sword cleanly in half. The metaphor of Griffith's dream being destroyed in this moment is plain to see. It would explain the events that would lead to Griffith forgetting about his dream, and would suggest that Guts living by the sword is his dream. But, when reflecting with his sword for the last time before the eclipse, Guts looks at it and says that his sword is all there is for him. He ponders whether or not it is his dream, but ultimately concludes that it isn't. Instead, it's something much nearer to him, like part of his body. Something that's kept him alive through more moments than he can count. Something that's been beside him his entire life. He then goes further, stating how his sword has touched more than his hands ever had. That this has been his life, in and of itself. This last big monologue says so much about Guts' character development in the arc, and is so well written whilst binding together all of the previous elements in his story. When Guts returns upon hearing that Casca has become the new leader of the Band of the Hawk, he is met with hostility and rage from a broken Casca who has remained and devoted herself to the remnants of the Hawk. She makes Guts aware of his value to Griffith and how he made Griffith weak in leaving. She even attempts suicide, as the man who she used to idolize and who gave her a purpose to live is, or may as well be, long gone. Guts saves Casca, almost a parallel to that time, and giving her another reason to exist. They act upon their feelings for one another, and Casca states that she is afraid that she might change, and that everything she had felt was important could fade away and be gone forever. A beautiful turn of phrase that perfectly encapsulates her understanding that she couldn't have that glittering dream with Griffith, and her fear of whatever might come. She is afraid of her maturity, but is interrupted when Guts speaks to Casca about scars, about how he understands that she has gotten to this point. They make love to one another, and everything seems to be perfect for the two. But suddenly, Guts is brought back to the moment when Donovan had his way with him. He brings his hands to Casca's neck and strangles her. Guts has this horrible flashback of Donovan and Gambino. Both Casca and Guts are brought back to their moment of trauma and are forced to confront it. Guts has to explain his story to someone for the first time, and it's such a heartbreaking moment when we hear it. It all comes out as Guts apologizes for killing Gambino, and is remiss at how things turned out. Guts then says about how he intended to get over it a long time ago, and wonders why it popped up exactly now. Without realizing it, Guts has been internalizing his trauma his whole life, and it is so powerful to see him realize that he doesn't need to anymore. Casca embraces Guts, grateful that they were both able to bond over what happened to them. Casca realizes she is no longer fearful that she might change, and that maybe her place is within Guts' heart. They sleep together, and then whilst sleeping, Guts recalls rubbing Gambino's medicine into his scar, the sword beside him shining dimly. In my mind, this is the most powerful scene and characterization in the manga. Going through the series, every time I reach this one part, I'm nearly driven to tears at how heartbreaking, heartwarming, and tragic it is all at the same time. But unfortunately for the two characters, it doesn't end there. With the end of the Golden Age, we got to see the end of Guts' search for a purpose, all of the growth he had made, opening up to people, falling in love with someone despite his childhood experience. I sacrifice. The people Guts opened up to, killed. The woman Guts found love with, raped, by the man who brought them together. Guts' friendship with Griffith, destroyed. After the eclipse, the world of Berserk turns into a much darker place. After Guts spends years trying to kill Griffith to no avail, his monologues of dreams and ambition are gone, and in their place, his regret at not staying behind with Casca. Post-traumatic stress which is growing power over everything he does, a tendency to close himself off from others, and a hatred of his demon son, who haunts him during his travels. The fate of Guts and Casca was actually foreshadowed by Gambino and Shizu. A crazed woman who has a failed birth and clings onto what she sees as her child. A man who doesn't recognize this child and is preoccupied by his own battles, leaving his woman to fight them. But all isn't as bad as things might seem. This resemblance introduces us to what would become the first major expansion in the universe of Berserk, Causality. Guts and Casca in this moment may appear to resemble these characters who were doomed in the story, but that is causality at its core. Flora would later explain that Guts is not bound to choose the same fate as those before him. Causality isn't cyclical, but instead, it is a spiral, where people aren't bound to their fates, Skull Knight, the person who saved Guts and Casca from the eclipse, is a shining example of it. And just like in that puddle, another sword to grasp, another reason to move forward and try to find a way through. It would be very true to say that the rest of the manga is Guts dealing with the aftermath of the Golden Age arc. This is why moments like Guts actually opening up to another group of people and depending on others is so important. It might take years, but it would be nice to think that Guts can overcome this trauma that has been forced upon him and has been born from him. That he can resolve his own dilemmas and be able to look back on everything one more time. That, to me, would be a fitting end to Berserk. That brings me to the end of this video on existentialism and trauma in Berserk. It was extremely fun to make, so I wanted to say thank you very much for watching if you got to this point. Thank you so much, it means a lot to me. I have 2 more videos just like this one on Berserk coming, all to celebrate the return of the manga. Make sure you subscribe so you can see them. Coming up next month, the origins of Berserk.